Fear of the unknown has a way of slipping into the cracks of the ordinary, lurking behind the gentle hum of a refrigerator at night, or in the silent glance of someone you think you love. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's in the quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like the pause before a scream. The midday sun spilled gold across the manicured lawns of Edenbrook Estate, a sprawling colonial mansion turned wedding venue. Hydrangeas, impossibly white, lined the archway where guests gathered, and string quartets hummed delicate notes that floated through the humid air. Betty Carrington stood still at the edge of the aisle, her veil clutched nervously. She was radiant. Dark hair pinned back in a vintage roll, lips painted a shade of crimson meant to mask how often they quivered. Behind her, bridesmaids whispered rehearsed encouragement. Ahead, Curtis Rourke, the groom, waited in a tailored navy suit. His smile was practiced, confident, almost too perfect, like he had rehearsed it in the mirror until it obeyed. On the surface, it was a fairy tale. Beneath, Betty's stomach churned with an ache she couldn't name. A shadow tugged at her, cold and invasive, a whisper that she wasn't walking toward a happily ever after, but toward something else entirely, a trap disguised as love. The string quartet faltered for a single off-key note. Betty flinched. Nobody else noticed. Betty was 32, an art historian who lived in patterns of silence and colour. Her childhood had been shaped by a father who disappeared without warning when she was 9, leaving her mother unstable, fragile, a woman who drowned in wine glasses and whispers of betrayal. Betty swore she would never become her mother. She craved control, stability, a partner who anchored rather than unmoored her. Curtis had seemed to fit the role perfectly when they met at a museum fundraiser. He was confident, attentive, and charismatic, a finance executive with the charm of a seasoned negotiator. He pursued Betty with precision. Expensive dinners, late-night phone calls, flowers at her office. His affection was overwhelming, intoxicating. Too much, too soon, but Betty convinced herself it was the intensity of true love. She mistook obsession for devotion. Even then, there had been warnings. A jealous flare in his eyes when she laughed too easily with a colleague. His habit of checking her phone playfully. His refusal to accept no as an answer, always persuading her until her no dissolved into his yes. But Betty tucked those red flags deep inside the folds of her longing for love. Her mother's broken voice echoed in memory. Don't end up alone. That's the real prison. At the reception, champagne glittered in crystal flutes. Betty, veil removed, tried to appear the glowing bride. Yet her eyes kept drifting toward a stranger. He was seated 2 tables away, tall, with an angular jaw softened by unruly curls. He wasn't dressed like the others. No suit jacket, just a crisp shirt with sleeves rolled carelessly to the elbows. His name, she later learned, was Julian Mercer, a freelance photographer invited by a mutual friend. Julian's gaze wasn't like Curtis's. Curtis's was ownership, appraisal, the look of a man tallying assets. Julian's was raw curiosity, as though he saw a story behind Betty's polished smile. Their eyes locked for a fraction too long. Betty's pulse stumbled. Later, when she slipped outside for air, Julian followed. The music from inside was muffled, a bass line beneath cicadas, humming in the dusk. "Congratulations," he said, voice low with a trace of mischief. "Though I get the sense you'd rather be anywhere else." Betty laughed nervously, caught.
Do I look that unhappy?
Not unhappy, just unfinished. The word sliced through her. Unfinished. Before she could respond, Curtis appeared in the doorway, his smile stretched taut. His hand pressed against the small of her back with just enough force to remind her, "You're mine." Julian's gaze lingered before he slipped into shadow. The seed had been planted. Married life at Curtis's penthouse was sleek, sterile, a panorama of glass and chrome. From the 21st floor, the city sprawled in grids of light. Betty's artwork never found a place on the walls. Curtis preferred minimalist emptiness. Clean lines, he called it. At first, Betty convinced herself this was love maturing. But the cracks deepened. Curtis tracked her whereabouts under the guise of concern. He questioned her friendships. When she mentioned pursuing her PhD, he dismissed it. Why burden yourself? You don't need that anymore. We have everything. It wasn't just control. There were nights when Curtis's warmth cooled into silence, his eyes distant, as if another life tugged at him beneath the surface. He worked late hours, phone calls taken behind locked doors, and then the notes began. Handwritten envelopes slid beneath their apartment door. No return address, no signature. The first read, "You don't know who he really is." Betty froze when she found it. Curtis brushed it off as a prank, but her heart whispered otherwise. Each note deepened the rift. His love isn't what you think. Beware what he hides at night. Betty started to notice things. A second phone tucked in Curtis's briefcase, cash withdrawals unaccounted for, the scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging faintly to his shirts. Fear of the unknown began its slow crawl beneath her skin. Weeks later, at a gallery opening, Betty saw Julian again. He stood in front of a canvas, a storm painted in violent strokes of blue and black. "You look like her," he said softly, not taking his eyes off the painting. "Her? The woman in the storm. Like you're standing in the middle of chaos, pretending it's not raining." Betty laughed, but it broke halfway. Something inside her ached with recognition. They began meeting in stolen moments, coffee shops, late-night walks. At first, it was just conversation, but the air between them thickened with something unspoken, dangerous. Julian was temptation not because of lust alone, but because he saw her. He asked about her art, her dreams, her fears. He listened in a way Curtis never did. Yet each step toward Julian was a betrayal, a strand pulling her deeper into a web. She told herself it wasn't an affair, not yet. But obsession isn't measured by bodies touching. It's measured by thoughts that won't let go. One night, Betty returned home to find Curtis waiting in the dark. No lamps, no city glow, just the silhouette of him in the chair.
"Where were you?"
he asked.
Out!
She said too quickly.
"Out where?"
She swallowed.
A gallery!
His jaw flexed. Silence stretched. Then calmly, almost too calmly, he said, "Don't lie to me, Betty. I can always tell." Her throat tightened. Did he know about Julian? About the notes? Curtis rose, stepping close enough that she caught the faint tang of whiskey on his breath. He cupped her chin, not tenderly, but like a man inspecting a delicate object. "I chose you," he whispered. "Don't make me regret it." Betty lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. The unknown had become a presence in the room, a living, breathing shadow. The notes escalated. "He's not who he says. Look closer. The truth bleeds." Betty began to question everything. She followed Curtis one evening, trailing his car through rain-slicked streets. He stopped at a derelict warehouse district. Through the blur of her windshield, she watched him meet a man, exchange a briefcase. Her pulse hammered. What was in it? Why was Curtis lying? The next day, she confronted him lightly. He deflected, turned the conversation, kissed her forehead. His charm was a weapon, disarming, making her doubt her own instincts. Meanwhile, Julian pressed closer. "Whatever you're running from," he told her one night, "you don't have to do it alone." But Betty was tangled now, between a husband whose secrets threatened to consume her, and a man whose presence was a dangerous escape. Late one evening, Betty returned to the apartment. The door was ajar. Inside, the place was silent, eerily so. On the kitchen counter sat a single object, the same brand of stationery as the notes, but this time the message was longer. He's already chosen his next victim. Look in the box under your bed. Heart racing, Betty stumbled to the bedroom. Hands trembling, she pulled out the storage box. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Women. Different women, smiling, unaware they were being watched. Each picture marked with a date. The most recent photograph was of her, taken just days ago. And behind her in the photo, barely visible in the frame, stood Julian. The room tilted. She staggered back, clutching the picture, the truth splintering her reality. The sound of the front door unlocking froze her in place. Curtis's voice echoed through the apartment.
Betty? We need to talk.
Her hands shook. She didn't know whether to hide the photographs, confront him, or run. The fear of the unknown had become the terror of discovery.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the Crimson Motives channel for more thrilling stories.